Welcome, everyone, back to our episode of Radical Thoughts on Innovation. I'm Maya Barber, and as always, I'm here with my co host, John Hall, and our special guest, Jonathan Grover. Jonathan, I hear you identify yourself as a 0 to 1 thinker. Can you explain to the viewers what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all. It's great to be here. Um, when I think about a 0 to 1 thinker, it all starts with problems, right? We have all these problems in our daily lives, and so many of them we've just gotten used to, that they become sort of latently unsolved problems. And for me, 0 to 1 thinking's about picking apart those day in the life of problems and saying, what can we do to make it better? Um, I think of an example. We have a detached garage, right? And this, by the way, as an example, applies whether or not you have a detached garage. But I think of just this notion of like me driving my car up to the garage and having to get that distance just right so that the clicker opens the garage, right? And it opens it, right? It's not an unsolved problem, but you got to get that distance just right. Otherwise, it's not going to open it. And what can we do to solve this, right? Because that's friction, right? Like it's my home. I got a litany of different technology devices around me that could make this more intelligent, that could remove that friction in my life. So I think I have a GPS on my phone, right? And like maybe it can just detect when I'm showing up to my garage. But then what if I'm not driving my car? Right? What if I'm just sort of walking around the backyard and the garage starts opening and shutting? Right? Well, that's not an intended solution. Well, I have a camera on my garage. I don't know if you folks do as well. And I think, well, maybe that's an intelligent solution, right? AI has easily gotten to the stage where it can recognize a car, could even recognize my car. And if you're worried about security, it could recognize my license plate, right? Why can't that camera, right, pointed sort of top of my garage, pointed towards the driveway, recognize my car as it's driving in, right? Read the license plate, say, yep, that's a car that belongs here, and the garage opens. And magically we've removed friction. And to me, that's the epitome of what 0 to 1 type of thinking is, right? We have all these problems that we just gloss over because we've gotten used to them. How do we actually look at those unsolved or undermet problems and solve them?
That's very cool. You on your LinkedIn profile, you've got this great metaphor of what you call your super Grover mindset. That being a superhero isn't about the cape, it's about delivering on the promise. I'm just curious, where did that come from and how does it show up in the way you lead your teams through change?
Um, well, I'd say first off, it comes from Sesame Street, obviously. Hats off and watching a lot of Sesame Street as a kid, and
Yeah.
with kids now, watching a lot more Sesame Street now as well. But I think connecting these sorts of things start with a great visual metaphor, right? People like to envision the value you bring. And when I think of our roles as innovators, as change leaders, what somebody really wants is a partner that makes them a superhero. Right, that really supercharges what comes next and that sort of puts on that cape, right, and holds their hand and takes them forward. And that's as I've developed my career and sort of develop my practice of what I do, I feel like that's what I bring. A change agent who comes in, right, throws on that cape, right, changes from Clark Kent to Superman, but we'll stick with Super Grover here,
Mhm.
right, and can help save somebody from those problems that they have or those things around the corner when you just need that sort of extra little bit of muscle. To me, it's very much the notion of being a SWAT team, right? I do something that's unique. You don't need a superhero all the time, every day, but when you need a superhero, you're always really excited by the results they drive for you. And to me, that really helps to anchor. I think we all pigeonhole ourselves to some degree, but the type of pigeonhole I belong in, right? I'm that superhero for what comes next. And when I'm right, I'm right. And when I'm not, when you don't need a superhero, you just need sort of, Clark Kent. I can be Clark Kent, but I'm much more the Super Grover.
And how do you see your teammates, reacting to you in that super Grover mindset? What sort of, you know, relationship does that create or how do they respond to that? I'm just curious.
I think since I found the right way to frame it and give that right mentality, it's really shifted the dynamic, right? It shifts the dynamic to one of empowerment that each leader, each teammate, every person I manage is really responsible for their own bits of the world, their own delivery, their own outcomes. And I'm really here to help supercharge them. And I'm here to engage on that lever. My management style has always been one that I describe as the Sherpa style. And I don't know if that's a real thing, but
Mhm.
it represents that right thing to me to help coach and push and give people the direction. And Super Grover goes very much along with it of you person, you are empowered, but you have a buddy by your side who's here that you can tap in when you need somebody with superpowers. uh, you know, use it wisely, use it sparingly, but use it appropriately, and it's going to supercharge you.
That's great. And then, as a change agent, you have led projects that turned huge ambitions. I mean, even billion-dollar opportunities into tangible results. And so just kind of picking up what we've been talking about, when you're facing that kind of scale, I mean, how do you decide where to start and then how to keep the momentum going?
That's such a great question. I remember this great article from Harvard Business Review, and I think right now it's probably a little bit over a decade ago that it was published. And this article talks about deal killers, right? And this applies to any sort of things we do. But when you step back and you think of an initiative or a project or a product, there's always a few things. And I often think of this as seeing the forest through the trees, right? A few things that are absolutely critical to getting something going, that without them, it doesn't matter how many details you get right, the whole thing's going to fall apart. And when I think of these large strategic initiatives and projects I've driven, right, I always start to center at the deal killers, right? And to me, there's two very common deal killers across anything, right? It applies across all domains. Can somebody understand it? And can they support it? And that's generally where I try to step back and start. How do you convey what it is you're trying to accomplish in a way that anyone at any level, from the C-suite down to, that person coding in a back room or working on mainframe code or training the AI or handling the support calls, that they can all understand the goal of this initiatives. And it doesn't have to be sort of that one elevator pitch sentence for all the different levels, but to have that cohesive picture that everybody from top to bottom can really understand the goal of it. That's sort of step one in making sure you can drive people behind that strategic initiatives. And the second is obviously, can they support it, right? So understanding what it is, but how does this align to what they hope to deliver or how they hope to grow, or a pain point that they see in the world that needs to be solved. So for me, when you boil it down to sort of those two critical deal killers, you're really able to align teams and people behind the right thing and get everybody pointed in the right direction. Then it gets complicated. But I'd say without those things, you don't have a strategic initiative that's able to deliver $1 billion of change.
And I know, Jonathan, you've helped keep like innovation alive inside large organizations. How do you go about sustaining that energy, but with yourself or with your team members?
Duct tape. Uh, Duct tape's a magical ingredient. Um, I believe, when it comes to um, innovation, creating something new, it's a bumpy road, right? We like to tell these retrospective stories about how we always made the right choice and everything just sort of went our way. It is never actually like that. That's just what makes great books, right? I'd say at the end of the day, you have to really love the journey that you're on to keep these things alive. You have to enjoy the fact that it's going to be hard, but those hard points show you moments of clarity, moments of sort of rising to the challenge. I like the term forged in fire, right? You become stronger through this process and wiser. And with that, so personally, my favorite part in any journey is the pivot, right? That aha moment where you were tasked with something, you encountered adversity, there was this problem, and you said, that path's not going to work. I got to change it and try something new. Because to me, that's sort of just a new explosion of excitement on the possibilities that could be and the new things you can learn as you pivot towards success. Um, I'd say that's the mentality I have as I come into new teams, often teams that were sort of more operational and are sort of seeking those new big growth things. Um, the comfort with the pivot, right? The goal, right? We'll get to it, but it's not about the plan you start out with. It's about finding that right path through the forest to success. That's hard. It's a hard change. But when people start to embrace it, they enjoy the journey more, right? Because they appreciate failure is just part of that journey, and failure is just another reason to pivot and have success and learn more. And at the end of the day, if you keep at it, you keep pivoting, there's always some way to get to that successful outcome.
Yeah. And now, obviously, like in our day and age, AI can obviously add value to a company. But where do you think most leaders go wrong when trying to add AI?
I think we're in really early days of adding AI in. Geez, when it comes to product portfolios, I have so many conversations about different ways AI is disrupting the portfolio and transforming the competitive landscape. When it comes to ROI, I have so many of those different conversations around what is measurable, what's not. Do you start with um, those those jobs you know how to quantify and layer in AI there? I think truly what we're trying to solve at this stage is where AI plays in our day-to-day lives. And not everything is going to be quantifiable by the normal ROI standards. So let's take an example. Let's say I have an AI tool and it lets me do 8 hours of work in 5 hours, right? That's great. Somebody's still paying me,
Yeah.
right? Um, but if you're measuring me on the outcomes, I'm instantly happier because now I have 3 hours of flex. You know, I can learn, I can do that administrative work, right? I can avoid having to work late into the evening to get that same goal done. But that's not easily quantified from a company ROI perspective, and yet it's hugely valuable. And I think this is where we have to start exploring how, coming back to that super growth analogy, how AI gives every individual person some level of superhero cape, right? And that cape doesn't always need to be quantified. It could just be a better outcome, right? Or getting to that outcome quicker, or being able to add a little bit more to the polished product at the end of the day. Or getting closer to your users. There's so many different ways in which AI will enhance that. But to me, the narrative right now that it's all got to be tagged back to the investment we put in and the ROI on AI spend, I think that's short-sighted. I appreciate having made a lot of business cases. That's often where it starts in terms of justifying the investment. I think more and more as we see the maturity of the technology and the maturity of toolkits, we'll start to see how it becomes commonplace for everybody in their day-to-day to use AI for different things that enhances their lives, enhances, those latent unmet problems as I started with, that they didn't know they could solve, and AI will help solve it.
One of the things I've been seeing with the number of companies and agencies using AI is more for, idea generation as a quick way to generate ideas. And I'm just curious, we've talked with a couple of different experts over the past few weeks or so about, how is the best way to use AI as an inspiration tool. I'm just curious for you how you're seeing it in that regard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with different R&D leaders about how AI is coming into their space. Um, I don't like to think of AI as a creativity tool, although it can help you be creative, right? I like to think of AI as a tool that helps you uncover things that you weren't able to get to, and that sparks the aha of inspiration in you. For some people, that's how they define creativity, but for me, it's like that aha of inspiration. There have been great articles about experimental design with AI, and I think this is a fascinating way to look at this type of question, to say that when you run a test and you compare how scientists do experimental design, you give the same prompt to AI, AI will often come up with these radical experimental designs that scientists would never come up with. Some of them just way too far-fetched, right? But some of them pick up on very old published research or research from third parties that the scientists couldn't even consider, that surface those aha moments based on AI's ability to access that data that a normal human might not, or pick up on the fact that AI is willing to throw out outlandish things that we as humans might not, for fear of rejection or looking bad. I think there's a lot of ways in which AI will sort of spur that idea generation, that creativity, by forcing us to consider what ifs that we might not put forth ourselves.
Yeah. And playing devil's advocate, do you think companies will ever rely too heavy on AI in the future? Like, do you think there's like a median that they should stay between?
Probably is the answer. Um, early in my career, I was in banking, and it was at a time when um, companies were going through a lot of different types of outsourcing models, right? And there was this magical business case about like how much money you could save by outsourcing so much of your workforce and integrating them, and having sort of and of course, we didn't have the motto and video conference and collaboration technology we have now, but having people sort of staffed around the globe the full day. And I remember there was these huge ratios, right, that companies were going for. And 5 years later, as the model matured, as people realized what worked and what didn't work, there was this huge pullback, almost half of what the initial ratios had been on outsourcing folks. I think there's going to be a little bit of that with AI. We have so much dialogue right now about how small teams can do amazingly impressive things, but that's not actually novel. We just attribute it to AI, and we see it more. Small teams can do amazingly impressive things, but the goal of AI shouldn't be to be small, right? It should be to be super powered. At least that's my take. And so I think there's absolutely going to be companies that say, yeah, we did away with these whole teams or these entire functions because we've outsourced it to AI. That's great. It might work for them, but en masse, I think we'll see that there's some level of harmonious balance that works for everybody, and falls somewhere in the middle. So I do think we'll likely, I mean, we've seen some of it already in the news, right? With whole teams being outsourced, and then people realize that the tools, right? And I'm not saying it's any specific AI, the tools just don't function yet as expected. People were not trying to solve a problem; they were trying to solve for dollar savings, right? And they thought this was that magic silver bullet that could solve for the dollar savings. To some extent, it does, but they didn't realize what they were giving up in the process.
Yeah. John, do you have any more questions for Jonathan?
No, this has been fascinating. I really appreciate your time, Jonathan.
It's been a
Yes.
pleasure.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on. And thank you guys for tuning in. Stay tuned for next month's episode of Radical Thoughts on Innovation. Thank you, everyone.